Hey, stop scrolling for a second. A woman held a glass of water to a maid's lips and said, "Drink it if you're innocent." The whole room went silent. But what nobody in that penthouse knew was that the man standing by the window had already seen the truth. And he was about to destroy everything his fiancée built her whole life on. Stay with me. This gets unbelievable. Welcome back, friends. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Today's story is about power, pride, and the lie that almost destroyed an innocent woman's life. It's emotional. It's heartbreaking. And it has a twist you will not see coming. So grab something warm to drink, get comfortable, and let's begin. Nobody in that penthouse expected the night to end the way it did. Denise Coleman had worked as a maid for the Whitfield family for almost 3 years. She was 41 years old, a single mother of 2, and she took the 6:15 a.m. bus every single morning from Queens into Manhattan because it was the only way she could afford rent, groceries, and her daughter's asthma medication. She never complained. She never asked for more than what she was owed. She simply worked, quietly, faithfully, and with more dignity than most people in that glass tower could ever understand. The Whitfield penthouse sat on the 41st floor of a building overlooking Central Park, the kind of place where the silence itself felt expensive. Marcus Whitfield, 36 years old, was the heir to a real estate empire his grandfather built from nothing. He was kind in a quiet way, the kind of man who remembered the names of doormen and asked about their kids. And in 3 weeks, he was set to marry Eleanor Voss, beautiful, poised, and admired by everyone who only knew her from a distance. Denise had learned, over 3 years, not to be fooled by distance. Eleanor was polished the way marble is polished, cold, flawless, and hard underneath. She smiled for cameras. She thanked the staff in front of guests. But when no one was watching, her voice changed. Her eyes changed. Denise had seen it more than once. The way Eleanor's charm dropped the second a door closed. The way she spoke to the housekeeping staff like they were furniture that occasionally needed correcting. That Friday evening, the penthouse was full of people. Eleanor's parents had flown in from Connecticut. Marcus's business partners were there, along with a few close friends, all gathered for what was supposed to be a quiet engagement dinner before the wedding. Denise had been asked to stay late to help serve, something she didn't mind. The overtime pay would cover her daughter's inhaler refill. The evening had gone smoothly. Laughter. Champagne. Marcus giving a small toast about how Eleanor had changed his life. Denise remembered thinking, watching Eleanor smile up at him, that some people were very good at wearing the right face at the right time. It was near the end of the night, while the guests were seated around the marble dining table, that Denise carried in a tray of water glasses for the toast. A Whitfield family tradition, sparkling water before the final champagne pour. She set them down carefully, one by one, in front of each guest. She did not know in that moment that one of those glasses would change her entire life. Eleanor had disappeared into the kitchen only minutes earlier, saying she needed to check on the dessert. Denise hadn't thought anything of it. Why would she? Eleanor rarely stepped foot in the kitchen at all. But Marcus had noticed. He'd been standing near the hallway, checking a message on his phone, when he happened to glance up, and caught, in the reflection of the dark kitchen window, something that made his stomach drop. Eleanor, alone at the counter, tilting a small vial over one of the glasses. Stirring it once. Quickly. Carefully. Like she'd done it before. He blinked, telling himself he'd imagined it. Told himself the lighting was playing tricks. Eleanor came out seconds later, smiling, glass in hand, and placed it gently at a very particular seat at the table. Denise's seat, because in a small kindness that now felt cruel in hindsight, Eleanor had insisted, "The staff should sit with us tonight, Just this once, we're all family here. Marcus said nothing. Not yet. He needed to understand what he'd just seen before he said a single word. And that was the moment the room went still, because Eleanor stood, glass in hand, and turned toward Denise with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Denise," she said sweetly, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "would you mind trying this water? I think something's off with it." Denise blinked, confused. "Off, ma'am? It tastes strange," Eleanor said, still smiling. "Almost bitter. I just want to make sure nothing happened to it in the kitchen." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Denise's hands, still holding the empty serving tray, began to tremble, not from guilt, but from the sudden sick realization that something was very wrong. The silence stretched long enough that Denise could hear her own heartbeat. She looked around the table, Eleanor's parents exchanging glances, Marcus's business partners suddenly very interested in their napkins, Marcus himself standing frozen near the hallway, his jaw tight in a way she'd never seen before. "I don't understand," Denise said carefully. "I didn't touch the water after I poured it, ma'am." Eleanor tilted her head, feigning gentle concern, the kind of concern that was really just a performance for the audience at the table. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Denise. I just want to know it's safe. You were the last one near it." It was a trap disguised as a request. Denise understood that immediately. If she refused to drink it, she would look guilty. If something actually was wrong with the water, drinking it could hurt her. Either way, Eleanor had built a cage with a single soft-spoken sentence. "Eleanor," Marcus said quietly from across the room, "maybe this isn't necessary." "It's just water, Marcus," Eleanor said, still smiling that same practiced smile. "If it's fine, she has nothing to worry about." She turned back to Denise and held the glass out toward her, her voice dropping into something colder now that the sweetness had done its job. "Drink it if you're innocent." The words landed on the room like a slap. Denise's chest tightened. She had 2 children waiting for her at home. A daughter with asthma who needed her mother healthy and breathing, not lying somewhere with an unknown substance in her system because a rich woman wanted a show for her guests. But she also knew, with a certainty that came from 3 years of watching Eleanor operate, that refusing would end her job on the spot, maybe worse. "Ma'am," Denise said, her voice trembling but steady, "I don't think that's fair to ask of me." "Fair?" Eleanor's eyebrow lifted. "I think it's more than fair. I simply want to know that the woman serving my family's dinner hasn't done anything to compromise it. If you have nothing to hide, this should take you 5 seconds. Eleanor's mother shifted uncomfortably. "Eleanor dear, perhaps." "No, mother. This is my house soon. I get to decide what happens in it." Eleanor's eyes never left Denise's face. Denise looked down at the glass being held out toward her, the ice slowly melting inside it, and for a brief, terrifying second, she thought about her daughter's small face, the way she smiled through her nebulizer treatments at night, and how there would be no one to hold that mask steady if something happened to her mother in this apartment. Marcus took a step forward. "Denise, you don't have to." "It's fine, Mr. Whitfield," Denise said quietly, cutting him off, her pride refusing to let her be treated like she needed rescuing in front of a room full of strangers. "I have nothing to hide." She reached out and took the glass. Eleanor's smile widened, just slightly, just enough that only Marcus, watching from across the room with newly opened eyes, could see the flicker of satisfaction underneath it. Denise raised the glass to her lips. And that was the exact moment Marcus crossed the room in 3 fast strides and gently, but firmly, closed his hand over hers, stopping the glass an inch from her mouth. "Don't," he said. "Don't drink it." The table erupted into confused murmurs. Eleanor's smile finally cracked. "Marcus, what are you doing?" He turned to face her, and for the first time that night, his voice was ice cold. "I think the better question, Eleanor," What did you do? The room went utterly silent. Eleanor's face shifted through several expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Confusion, defensiveness, and then, just barely, fear. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, laughing lightly, though the laugh had no warmth in it now. Marcus, you're scaring our guests. I saw you, Marcus said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. In the kitchen. I saw you put something in this glass before you brought it out here. Every head at the table turned toward Eleanor. That's absurd, she said, but her hand had gone very still at her side. I watched your reflection in the window, Marcus continued, and now there was something raw underneath the calm, something that sounded like a man realizing in real time that he'd almost married a stranger. You poured something from a small bottle. You stirred it. And then you walked out here and handed that exact glass to Denise, and accused her of tampering with it. You're mistaken, Eleanor said, but her voice had lost its polish now, cracking at the edges. Am I? Marcus turned to the table and, with a steadiness that surprised even himself, picked up the glass from Denise's trembling hand. Then you won't mind drinking it yourself. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Eleanor stared at the glass being extended toward her, and for the first time all evening, the mask fully slipped. Her eyes darted toward her parents, toward the door, toward Marcus, searching for an exit that didn't exist. This is ridiculous, she finally said, forcing a laugh that fooled no one. I'm not going to play games at my own engagement dinner. It's not a game, Marcus said quietly. You just asked an innocent woman to drink something you tampered with, in front of a room full of people, to punish her for something you did. So either you drink it right now, or you tell everyone here exactly what's in that glass. Eleanor's mother had gone pale. Her father set down his fork slowly, his eyes fixed on his daughter with an expression Denise couldn't quite read. Not shock exactly, but something closer to recognition, like a man watching a pattern repeat itself. Eleanor, her father said softly, what did you do? It wasn't a question. It was a demand dressed as a whisper. Eleanor's composure finally shattered. It wasn't going to hurt her, she snapped, her voice suddenly sharp, stripped of all its earlier sweetness. It would have made her sick for a few hours. Enough to prove she was careless. Enough for me to have her fired before the wedding. I didn't want her. She jabbed a finger toward Denise without even looking at her. Around during the ceremony. She sees too much. She hears too much. Sees too much of what? Marcus asked, though something in his face suggested he already suspected the answer. Eleanor's jaw tightened, and for a moment it looked like she might actually confess everything right there at the table. Instead, she turned toward Denise with something like desperate anger. You don't understand what it's like, she hissed. To have someone in your house who watches everything, who reports everything back. I have never once reported anything to anyone, Denise said, her voice shaking but clear. I clean your home. I don't gossip about your marriage before it's even happened. That's not what I heard, Eleanor snapped. From who? Marcus asked sharply. And that was when Eleanor made her second mistake of the night. She went quiet in exactly the way that told everyone in that room she had no good answer. Denise, standing there with her hands still trembling from the glass she'd almost drunk, suddenly understood something with painful clarity. This had never really been about her at all. She was just the easiest person to blame, the one with the least power in the room. And that was precisely why Eleanor had chosen her. The truth, once it started coming out, didn't stop. Marcus set the glass down on the table with a controlled precision that somehow felt louder than if he'd thrown it. Someone told you Denise was talking about our marriage, he said slowly. Who? Eleanor's silence stretched long enough that her own mother finally spoke. Eleanor. Answer him. It doesn't matter who, Eleanor said, but her voice had lost its fight now, dropping into something smaller, more cornered. It matters to me, Marcus said. Because I think I know. He looked toward the hallway, where a man in a dark suit, one of the business partners invited that evening, a man named Curtis Hale who worked closely with Eleanor's father's investment firm, had been standing quietly the entire time, saying nothing, watching everything. Curtis, Marcus said. You've been feeding Eleanor stories about Denise for weeks. Haven't you? Curtis's expression flickered, just for a second, before he schooled it back into neutrality. I don't know what you mean. I do, Denise said suddenly, surprising even herself. All eyes turned to her. She took a breath, steadying her voice. 2 weeks ago, that man asked me if I'd noticed anything strange about Ms. Voss's phone calls. He asked me to tell him if I ever saw her meeting anyone she shouldn't be meeting. I told him it wasn't my place, and I never spoke to him again. The room shifted. Eleanor's face had gone from defensive to something closer to panic. Why would he ask you that? Marcus asked Eleanor directly. Unless there was something he was afraid you would find, or something he was hiding, and he needed to know if the staff had seen it. It was Eleanor's father who finally broke the moment. He set his napkin down with the calm, terrible finality of a man who had run enough companies to recognize when the numbers didn't add up. Curtis, he said, you've been managing the Whitfield merger paperwork for the past 6 months. Eleanor's trust fund is tied to that account. The color drained from Curtis's face. Marcus looked between the two of them, understanding dawning like a slow, sickening wave. You two have been moving money, he said quietly. Haven't you? Eleanor's shoulders sagged, the last of her composure finally, fully gone. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she whispered, and for the first time all night, she didn't sound cold. She sounded exhausted, like a woman who had been holding up a very heavy lie for a very long time and had just been allowed, however painfully, to put it down. Curtis found a way to move funds through the merger before it closed. I only agreed because Father's firm was going to fold without it. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. You poisoned a woman's water to protect that? Marcus's voice cracked, disbelief and heartbreak tangled together. I didn't poison her, Eleanor said quickly, desperately. It was a mild laxative. Something to embarrass her, not hurt her. Denise had seen Curtis and me arguing in the study last month. Panic. I thought if she got fired before the wedding, before anyone started asking real questions, it would just go away. Denise, still standing there, still holding the tray she'd carried in an hour earlier full of hope for a good night's pay, felt something inside her chest finally loosen. Not relief exactly, but the quiet, aching vindication of being believed after being disbelieved by an entire room. You were willing to destroy my life, she said softly. To protect yours. Eleanor had no answer for that. None of them did. The dinner that had begun with champagne and toasts ended with Eleanor's father calling his lawyer at 11 o'clock at night, and 2 private security guards quietly escorting Curtis Hale out of the building before the police could be called to make it official. Denise sat in the kitchen afterward, alone, her hands still shaking, while the sound of raised voices and slamming doors echoed faintly from the other room. She hadn't asked to be part of any of this. She had simply wanted to finish her shift, collect her pay, and get home in time to check on her daughter before bed. It was nearly midnight when Marcus found her there. He looked different than he had an hour earlier. Not just tired, but hollowed out, like a man who had just watched the foundation of his entire future crack open in front of him. He pulled out a chair across from her and sat down without asking, which somehow felt more respectful than if he had. I'm sorry, he said simply. For all of it. For what she did. For not stepping in sooner. I should have said something the second I saw her in that kitchen, instead of waiting. Denise wrapped her hands around a cup of coffee someone had made for her, more to have something to hold on to than because she wanted it. "You did step in," she said quietly. "Before I drank it. That's more than most people would have done." "It shouldn't have taken that long," Marcus said. "You could have been really hurt tonight. Because of something you had nothing to do with." Denise was quiet for a moment, staring into her cup. "Can I tell you something, Mr. Whitfield?" "Marcus," he corrected gently. "Please." Marcus. The name felt strange in her mouth after 3 years of formality. Tonight wasn't the first time someone in a room like this decided I was the easiest person to blame. It won't be the last either. That's just how it goes for people like me. You learn to expect it. She looked up at him, and there was no bitterness in her voice, only a tired kind of honesty. "What surprised me tonight wasn't that she tried to hurt me. It's that someone with everything to lose actually chose to stop her." Marcus sat with that for a long moment. "You didn't deserve any of this," he finally said. "And I want you to know, whatever happens with the wedding, whatever happens with Eleanor and her father's company, you still have your job here. If you want it. And I'm going to make sure Curtis Hale answers for whatever he did with that trust fund, and whatever role Eleanor played in it." Denise studied him carefully, the way she'd learned to study every person who'd ever made her a promise. "You don't have to fix everything tonight," she said. "No," Marcus agreed. "But I have to start somewhere." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, showing her a message he'd sent only minutes earlier, to a family attorney, requesting a meeting first thing in the morning, not about the wedding, but about ensuring Denise was protected, compensated for tonight, and never put in that position again by anyone in that household. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a fairy tale ending wrapped in a bow. But for Denise, sitting in that kitchen at midnight with her hands finally steady again, it was something she hadn't expected from a family like this. Accountability offered freely, without her having to fight for it. The days that followed moved fast, the way scandal always does among families who live behind glass walls 40 floors above everyone else. By Monday morning, word had already begun to spread through Eleanor's social circle. Quiet phone calls, careful whispers at brunches, the kind of gossip that traveled faster than any news channel. Eleanor Voss, golden girl of Manhattan society, had been caught tampering with a household employee's drink to cover up financial misconduct with her father's business partner. The engagement, once splashed across 2 wedding blogs and a Vogue feature preview, was over before it had even truly begun. Marcus called off the wedding formally 2 days later. He didn't do it with anger, and he didn't do it publicly. He simply told Eleanor in a private meeting arranged by both families' lawyers that he could not build a life with someone who had shown him, so clearly, so undeniably, exactly who she was capable of becoming when she felt cornered. Eleanor didn't argue. Something in her seemed to have deflated entirely once the truth was out, once the performance she'd maintained for years finally had nowhere left to hide. Curtis Hale was formally investigated within the week. It turned out the money he and Eleanor had quietly moved through the merger wasn't a small oversight. It was nearly $2 million, funneled through shell accounts meant to prop up her father's failing firm before the merger closed and outside auditors could catch the discrepancy. Denise's accidental discovery of them arguing in the study hadn't been about anything scandalous at all. She'd simply overheard Curtis warning Eleanor that, if this doesn't work, we're both finished. She hadn't understood what it meant at the time. She'd simply mentioned once, in passing to a fellow housekeeper, that Ms. Voss had seemed stressed about something with Mr. Hale. That single sentence, twisted through the grapevine of a house full of secrets, had been enough for Eleanor's paranoia to mark her as a threat. It was, in the end, such a small thing to have nearly cost Denise everything. Denise herself tried to stay out of the fallout as much as she could. She wasn't interested in the spotlight, wasn't interested in being anyone's cautionary tale or headline. She went back to work quietly, back to the early bus rides and long hours, back to her daughter's nebulizer treatments each night. But something had shifted in that penthouse, and everyone who worked there could feel it. Marcus began treating the staff differently, not out of guilt exactly, but out of a genuine, uncomfortable awakening to how much he had never truly seen the people who kept his life running. He learned Denise's daughter's name. He learned that her son was applying for community college and struggling with the application fees. He didn't throw money at these things carelessly, the way rich men sometimes do to soothe their own conscience. He asked questions, listened to answers, and slowly began to understand what real respect looked like, instead of the performance of it he'd been raised around his whole life. Denise noticed. She didn't trust it easily. 3 years working in that house had taught her not to trust kindness that came suddenly, without history behind it. But little by little, week by week, the small, consistent gestures began to feel less like guilt and more like something real. It was almost 3 weeks after that terrible dinner when Denise's daughter, Maya, had a bad asthma flare-up in the middle of the night. Denise had rushed her to the emergency room at 2 a.m., her hands shaking on the steering wheel of her old sedan, praying the whole drive that the inhaler refill she'd been putting off for 2 weeks, because she simply hadn't had the extra $40 that month, hadn't cost her daughter something irreversible. Maya was fine in the end. Stabilized after a few hours of oxygen and a new inhaler prescription. But sitting in that hospital waiting room at 4 in the morning, exhausted and terrified and quietly furious at a system that made a mother choose between rent and her child's medication, Denise had never felt smaller. What she didn't expect was the knock on her apartment door 2 days later. It was Marcus, standing awkwardly in the hallway of her building in Queens, looking wildly out of place in his tailored coat among the fluorescent lights and peeling paint of her hallway. He held a folder in his hands. "How did you get my address?" Denise asked, more surprised than upset. "HR records," he admitted. "I hope that's all right. I heard about your daughter. The housekeeper who covers your Thursday shifts mentioned it. I wanted to make sure she was okay." Denise crossed her arms, wary. "She's fine. She's resting." "I'm glad." Marcus held out the folder. "This isn't charity," he said quickly before she could refuse it. "It's a proposal. I've been restructuring the household staff benefits, health coverage, paid sick leave, tuition assistance for employees' kids. It's something I should have done years ago, and I'm ashamed it took what happened with Eleanor for me to actually look at it seriously." Denise took the folder cautiously, flipping through it. It wasn't a token gesture. Full health insurance, paid time off, an actual livable wage increase. And yes, buried in the fine print, a modest scholarship fund for employees' children pursuing higher education. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Are you really doing this?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because that night I almost let someone drink something dangerous because I was too slow to speak up, too comfortable in my own house to notice what was happening right in front of me. And it made me realize, I've spent my whole life not paying attention to the people who keep everything running around me. You included. You've worked for my family for 3 years, and until that night, I couldn't have told you your daughter's name." Denise studied him for a long moment. "Maya," she said finally. "Her name is Maya." Marcus nodded, something like genuine emotion crossing his face. "Maya," he repeated, like he was committing it to memory this time for real. It wasn't a fix for everything. It wasn't going to undo years of being overlooked, or the terror of that dinner table, or the exhaustion of raising 2 kids alone on a maid's salary in one of the most expensive cities in the world. But it was, Denise thought as she closed the door behind him that evening, a beginning. And sometimes a beginning was more than she'd learned to expect from people like him. Word of what happened at the Whitfield penthouse eventually reached further than either Marcus or Denise expected. A guest who had been at that engagement dinner, a young journalist named Priya Anand, invited as a +1 and seated near the far end of the table, had quietly written an article about the culture of silence around household staff in wealthy homes, using the incident, with names changed at Denise's request, as an anonymous case study. The piece went semi-viral within domestic worker advocacy circles, sparking a wider conversation about labor protections, dignity, and the invisible power imbalance between employers and the people who worked in their homes. Denise hadn't asked for any of that attention, and when Priya reached out asking if she'd be willing to speak publicly about her experience, Denise initially said no. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. She just wanted to raise her children in peace. But something changed for her the day she picked Maya up from school and overheard another mother in the pickup line say, dismissively, about a nanny who'd been let go without notice or severance. "Well, that's just how it is with people in that line of work, you can't get too attached." The casualness of it, the way an entire person's dignity had been reduced to a shrug, lit something in Denise that 3 years of quiet endurance hadn't quite extinguished. She called Priya back the next day. The interview she eventually gave was careful, measured, and honest. She didn't sensationalize what had happened. She didn't paint herself as a victim looking for sympathy. She simply told the truth, about the fear of that glass being held to her lips, about the years of being spoken over and unseen, about how one moment of someone finally choosing to see her had changed the trajectory of not just her own life, but potentially the lives of every domestic worker in that building. The article, when it published under her real name, a choice she made deliberately, refusing to let this be a story hidden behind anonymity, struck a chord far beyond what anyone anticipated. Other domestic workers began sharing their own stories in the comments, in follow-up pieces, in a groundswell that slowly, imperfectly, began pushing conversations about fair labor practices into rooms that had never had to have them before. Marcus, for his part, never tried to take credit for any of it, never postured himself as some hero of the story. When reporters occasionally reached out to him for comment, he consistently redirected them back to Denise, insisting the story belonged to her, not to him. It was during this period, months after that terrible dinner, well past the dust of the broken engagement settling, that something quietly, unexpectedly began to shift between them. Not romance, not anything so simple or so convenient. Just genuine respect, built slowly over shared honesty. Over Marcus showing up consistently instead of performing kindness once and disappearing. Denise noticed it in small things. He asked about Maya's asthma treatment progress without being prompted. He remembered her son's college application deadline and quietly connected him with a mentorship program through his company, not as a favor, but because he genuinely listened when Denise mentioned her son's dream of studying engineering. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better, the slow, unglamorous work of a person actually changing a year past. Eleanor Voss, in the aftermath of the scandal, disappeared from Manhattan's social circles almost entirely. Her father's firm collapsed under the weight of the financial investigation, the merger dissolved amid fraud allegations, and Curtis Hale was eventually charged with multiple counts of financial misconduct. Eleanor herself avoided criminal charges. The laxative in the glass had technically caused no lasting harm, and prosecutors determined there wasn't enough evidence to charge her directly with the financial fraud, only her association with it. But her reputation, the currency she had spent her whole life cultivating, never recovered. The last anyone heard, she had moved to Chicago to live with a distant cousin, largely out of the public eye. Denise heard about it secondhand, through the same social grapevine that had once nearly destroyed her. She felt no satisfaction in it, no bitter triumph. Just a quiet, tired relief that it was finally, truly over. Her life, meanwhile, had changed in ways she never could have predicted that Friday night a year earlier, standing frozen with a glass of tainted water inches from her lips. Maya's asthma was well managed now, covered fully under the new employee health plan Marcus had implemented. A plan that, after the article's reach, other wealthy households in the building had quietly begun adopting too, embarrassed into decency by public scrutiny they hadn't expected. Her son had been accepted into a state engineering program with a partial scholarship, supplemented by the Tuition Assistance Fund, and was thriving in ways Denise had once only allowed herself to dream about in the quiet exhaustion of 6 a.m. bus rides. Denise still worked at the Whitfield penthouse, though her role had shifted over the months. She now helped oversee staff onboarding and training, ensuring new employees understood their rights and benefits from day one, something she'd insisted on when Marcus offered her the position. It wasn't charity. It was earned, and she made sure everyone, including herself, understood that distinction clearly. On the 1-year anniversary of that dinner, a date Denise hadn't consciously been tracking, but that her body seemed to remember anyway, a tightness in her chest that arrived unbidden that morning. Marcus asked her to stay a few minutes after her shift. He led her to the same dining room where it had all happened, the marble table gleaming under the same chandelier. For a moment, old fear flickered in her chest before she reminded herself, firmly, that fear no longer belonged in this room. On the table sat a simple bouquet of flowers and a small plaque. "I wanted to do something," Marcus said a little awkwardly. "To mark it. Not the bad part. The part after, the part where things actually changed. I had this made for the staff lounge downstairs." The plaque read simply, "Dignity is not a privilege we grant. It is a debt we owe." Denise read it twice, something tightening in her throat that had nothing to do with fear this time. "It's a lot of words for something that started with you almost letting me drink poisoned water," she said, half joking, though her voice wavered slightly. Marcus smiled, rueful. "I know. I'm still working on making up for that." "You are," Denise agreed quietly. "You have been. That counts for something." Looking back, Denise would later say the strangest part of that whole terrible night wasn't the glass, or the accusation, or even the fear of what might have happened if Marcus hadn't stepped in when he did. The strangest part was how ordinary it had felt in the moment, how easily a woman with everything could try to destroy a woman with nothing, simply because it was convenient, because she assumed no one would stop to ask questions, because for most of history, people like Denise were expected to simply absorb whatever was done to them and keep working the next morning as if nothing had happened. What made that night different, what turned it from just another quiet injustice into something that actually mattered, was one person choosing, at the exact right moment, to see clearly instead of looking away. That is the moral at the heart of this story. Dignity is fragile in the hands of people who don't value it, but it can be protected, restored, and even multiplied by a single act of courage from someone willing to tell the truth when it's inconvenient, when it costs them something, when silence would have been so much easier. Denise never became wealthy. She never became famous beyond that one article. And she never wanted to be. But she raised 2 children who watched their mother stand tall after being nearly broken, who learned that a person's worth is never determined by what they own or where they come from, but by the quiet strength it takes to keep showing up, keep working, keep believing that the truth eventually finds its way to the surface, even when it's buried under wealth and marble floors and glasses of water meant to silence you. And Marcus learned something too, something that no amount of inherited wealth had ever taught him. That the measure of a life isn't found in how well you're treated by people who have something to gain from you. It's found in how you treat the people who have nothing to offer you but their honest work, and how far you're willing to go to make things right once you finally see them clearly. If this story moved you even a little, if it made you think about the people who quietly hold your life together, the ones you might not always stop to truly see, do something small for them today. Kind word. A moment of real attention. Costs you nothing, and for someone like Denise it can mean everything. And if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this one, and share it with someone you love. You never know who might need to hear today that the truth always finds its way home, and that dignity, once given freely, has a way of changing everything. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.